This is BBC One. Now, the 9 o'clock news with John Humphreys.
There's been more trouble on the streets of Northern Ireland tonight. Sinn Féin's chief negotiator was clubbed on the head. The government had appealed for calm, but there were disturbances as loyalists planned to stage another march. 2 British children were killed when their school bus crashed off a mountain road in the Swiss Alps. And the Mars rover cozies up to Barnacle Bill and sends back more pictures. Good evening. There's been more violence on the streets of Northern Ireland tonight. The chief negotiator for Sinn Féin, Martin McGuinness, was hit on the head during disturbances in the town of Balahi as dozens of loyalist bands prepared to march through the streets. It's been nothing like the scale of last night's violence. The number of people injured since yesterday's march in Drumcree has passed the 100 mark. 6 of them are seriously ill. The government has appealed for willingness and understanding in Northern Ireland. Our Ireland correspondent Dennis Murray reports.
Another controversial parade in Balahi. Catholic residents yet again opposing a loyalist parade through what they regard as their village. There was early trouble as some were pushed back by police. Martin McGuinness of Sinn Féin was hit, he says, by a police baton. More nationalist grievance after the weekend.
Hey, come over here!
The nationalist reaction to the Drumcree decision, and into this afternoon, the trouble went on. 2 buses burning in West Belfast. The aftermath of a night of rioting. Nationalist areas across Northern Ireland strewn with the wreckage of street violence. In Belfast, Strabane, Newry and Armagh, the pattern was the same. Perhaps the same as it's been for almost 3 decades at times of tension and confrontation. Petrol bombs and stones from the rioters, scores of plastic bullets fired in response. In Derry, 4 people hit by them were seriously injured, as was a 14-year-old boy in Belfast whose family say he was struck from close range as he moved away from the police. To nationalists and Republicans, the venting of anger. To unionists, unjustifiable violence orchestrated by the IRA, which would have happened anyway. In several places, gunmen opened fire on the security forces. In one shooting, a policewoman was hit, as was a 14-year-old Protestant boy at the Peace Line in Belfast. The Northern Ireland Secretary said she understood nationalist anger, but she said it was now time for the Orangemen to be generous about future marches.
When I see members of the Orange Order today, I will expect to see some willingness and understanding of the events of this weekend, reflected in their words and actions during the days ahead. There can and should be no triumphalism. We will continue to work to resolve disputes during the rest of this week, but I can only do that if the people involved on both sides are also willing.
The Sinn Féin president called for an end to hijackings and burnings. This evening he stopped one such incident in West Belfast.
I mean, there's a lot of anger in this community, understandably, and justifiable, righteous anger, but we have to channel it into actions which do not deflect attention from the British government's position. And I think these type of actions do just that. They inconvenience people here in this community.
Drumcree has not resolved the marching controversy, and after ceasefires and a peace process, Northern Ireland's as bitterly divided as ever. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Belfast.
And our correspondent June Kelly is in Balahi. June, has that march begun yet?
Yes, it started behind me. I'm sure you can probably hear the bands. The main street here has effectively been cut in half. The Orange men are going to be allowed to walk up to the Orange Hall, but no further, because at the Orange Hall there are row upon row of army vehicles, a massive army presence here as well.
How serious was the trouble earlier this evening, and is it still going on, any of it?
No, we believe now that on the nationalist side, which is the other side of the police Land Rovers, the situation is now calm. The people there seem to have heeded the warnings from Martin McGuinness to stay calm. The trouble, it was a skirmish, as we've seen, involving Martin McGuinness. Some people did seem to be keen to throw things, but Martin McGuinness was appealing to them to stay calm, not get involved in any violence. He said, the eyes of the world are on Balahi tonight, so please stay calm, don't be violent.
So who hit him? He said the police. Did anybody see that?
No, it was a baton. He said he was hit. There was so much chaos going on and mayhem. He said he was hit by a baton. He was trying to speak to people and was also trying to do interviews with the media, and the situation just got a bit overheated. But as we say, it is now calm.
June, thanks very much indeed. We'll may go back to you later if necessary, and we'll have more from Northern Ireland during the bulletin later anyway. 2 British teenagers on a school trip to France were killed when their coach crashed off a mountain road and into a ravine. They were 16-year-old Nicola Moore and 14-year-old Robert Boardman, both from St James's Secondary School in Bolton. The accident happened at the French Alps near the town of Moutier. John McIntyre reports from there.
French emergency services faced the awesome job of a rescue operation in a steep-sided ravine. They found the wreckage wedged among the trees and had to use climbing ropes to reach the children after their coach plunged 20 metres from the twisting mountainous roads of the Savoie region of the Alps. One of the pupils, 16-year-old Nicola Moore, was confirmed dead at the scene. 2 boys who were seriously injured were airlifted to Moutier Hospital, which treated most of the injured pupils. But one of the boys, 14-year-old Robert Boardman, died during emergency surgery. At the school in Bolton, there was no disguising the sense of shock as pupils comforted each other, not knowing which of their friends had been killed or injured. The head teacher had informed Nicola's mother, a member of staff at the school, of her daughter's death, just moments before giving a news conference.
I've informed the whole of our staff and indeed the whole of our school this afternoon of the event, and the school obviously is shocked and stunned. School will be closed tomorrow.
Pupils have also been told that another school trip planned for Wednesday was likely to be cancelled. One of the governors described St James's as normally one big happy family and said counselling would be available to help pupils cope with their grief.
Some really shocked, some very upset young people, obviously. Their classmates, their friends within school. I mean, we're only a comparatively small school, and you know, we've always tend to know one another.
Those involved in the crash had been taking part in an activity holiday. Tonight, as the investigation into the cause continued, there were messages of condolence for the school, including from the Education Secretary. John McIntyre, BBC News.
The new French government has confirmed that it won't meet one of the key conditions for joining the European single currency, and that's raised more doubts about the future of the currency because Germany has insisted that members must stand by the criteria or risk undermining the whole system. There are 3 main criteria for joining the single currency: a low rate of inflation, stable interest rates and a limited budget deficit, the difference between spending and revenue. That's the problem for France. From Brussels, our Europe business correspondent Jonathan Charles reports.
The marketing campaign is being stepped up. No opportunity to promote the future single currency is missed. A floating exhibition on the rivers of Europe is the latest attempt to bring the message to the people.
Die Rückseite wird eine nationale Seite sein.
The EU's citizens are encouraged to view the notes and coins they could soon be using. Monetary union may be just 18 months away. But many are worried about just what sort of single currency it's going to be. The criteria, which are supposed to guarantee the project's stability, might now be relaxed. At a news conference after talks in Brussels today, France confirmed that it won't be able to fulfil a strict interpretation of the rules for single currency membership. The government's budget deficit will be much higher this year than the level recommended by the Maastricht Treaty. France's finance minister, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, says delaying monetary union would be risky, though, insisting the treaty can be interpreted in various ways.
Chacun son rigorisme.
Demonstrations across France are putting extra pressure on the new socialist government not to cut spending again to meet the Maastricht target. If the French are to qualify, the rules will have to be eased. But Germany opposes such flexibility, fearing other weaker economies like Italy and Spain will demand the same leeway. It'd be a dangerous precedent.
The main problem, of course, is how can you trust the partners if you don't respect the rule, even in difficult circumstances, because that's precisely when the circumstances are difficult that rules get their credibility.
Over a buffet lunch for some of Europe's leading bankers, concern was expressed about such a cavalier approach. The result could be a less strong single currency. But governments won't just be bound by the economics when deciding whether to stick to the 1999 start date.
That's an economic judgment in part, but ultimately it's a political judgment in part. And I think the political judgment will prevail.
France's finance minister, meeting his German counterpart today, is sure a compromise will be found. Too much is at stake to permit failure. Germany's playing tough for now, but it may eventually decide that a little flexibility is a price worth paying to keep the project on track. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, Brussels.
Here, the government has published its plans to improve standards in schools, the most comprehensive, it says, since the war. The White Paper sets target dates for reaching higher standards by the year 2002 and says the government will intervene if they're not met. The Education Secretary, David Blunkett, said it offered a new deal for teachers and a new partnership for parents. But some teachers' leaders are sceptical. This report from our education correspondent, Sue Littlemore.
Is this over here?
This government has asked to be judged by the difference it makes in the nation's classrooms. The Prime Minister and his Education Secretary were at a primary school in London today, ahead of the publication of the White Paper, which will lead to the first major Education Act passed by a Labour government.
Expectations and aspirations must be raised if we are to succeed. Fair funding, fair admissions and cooperation will reunite the education service. It is time to set aside the cynicism and the culture of complacency.
The White Paper is designed to bring together a raft of policies, providing a mixture of pressure and support for all schools in the goal to raise standards. The proposals include asking all primary schools to focus at least an hour a day on English and maths, modernising comprehensive schools by setting pupils according to their ability in a subject, an accelerated process for sacking incompetent teachers, and a general teaching council to promote and raise the esteem of the profession.
My own experience, my life chances, depend...
As part of the consultation on the plans, a video has been produced in the spirit of a government hoping to persuade the nation to join its crusade. One union seems ready to do just that.
I like the general thrust of the White Paper. I think it is a blueprint for a future, and I'm sure we can achieve the results the government wants us to.
Other teacher representatives have more reservations.
Teachers will be very worried because this is further reform placed upon reform after reform of the previous years. I think this reform is certainly pointing in the right direction. It's a much better reform than the previous government, but it will still require a massive effort on the part of teachers.
But the government insists its targets are achievable. Ministers have described this White Paper as the biggest assault on low standards since the Second World War. It's a bold claim, but made in the knowledge this government has promised what amounts to a revolution in our schools and must expect to be held to account on that. Sue Littlemore, BBC News at the Department for Education.
A High Court judge is allowing 4 children to sue Essex County Council for being sexually abused by a teenage boy their parents had been fostering. The foster father, who can't be identified, says he's angry that social workers didn't warn him that the boy had already abused his own sister. The parents themselves were not allowed to seek compensation. The Home Office is considering releasing thousands of non-violent prisoners early and having them wear electronic tags. The prisons are overcrowded and it's getting worse. Strike action has been rejected by a second union involved in a dispute with British Airways. Members of the GMB union, who work as ground staff for BA, have voted by more than 2 to 1 against industrial action over the sale of the airline's catering operation. The government says tackling poverty will be made a priority in plans to improve the nation's health. Tessa Jowell, the Public Health Minister, promised to end the widening gap which results in the poor falling ill and dying younger than the better off.
Merthyr Tydfil in South Wales is on the wrong side of the health divide. Death rates among men of working age in the most deprived parts of Britain are 3 times as great as those in affluent areas, and research suggests this gap widened during the 1980s. The government has set itself a gargantuan task to tackle the underlying causes of ill health: poverty, unemployment, bad housing, and unhealthy lifestyles. Education, safe sex and healthy eating among the topics these teenagers in Merthyr discuss in a course run by the local NHS Trust. It's local initiatives like this which the government says are crucial in getting young people to make informed choices.
Young people in this area coming from a background where there are low income levels, very high unemployment, very often most young people have a feeling that they have very little choice. And what we're really trying to do is to break the cycle of disadvantage so that young people are able to make choices.
The new government created the post of Minister for Public Health, and in her first major speech, Tessa Jowell said the link between poverty and health must be fully acknowledged. Referring to the founder of the welfare state, she said Beveridge's 5 giant evils still needed to be fought.
Want will be tackled through the minimum wage, idleness through welfare to work, squalor through improved housing, through the use of capital receipts and through policies to improve the environment, ignorance through education, 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 and disease by rescuing and rebuilding our National Health Service.
The last Labour government commissioned research into health inequalities, but when the Black Report was finally published, Conservative ministers rejected it as a wish list which was too costly to implement. That could now be Labour's problem, raising expectations among the poor, but failing to provide the cash needed to close the health divide between the social classes. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
The Mir space station got some badly needed supplies today when a Russian craft managed to dock successfully alongside it. It brought spare parts to repair the damage caused in a collision with another cargo ship 12 days ago and a few home comforts. Tonight, NASA managers say the space station's machinery for maintaining a breathable atmosphere is causing problems, but backup systems are keeping the crew safe. And scientists at NASA have got a new lot of pictures from Mars to study tonight. The rover vehicle has been on the move and it's been looking at a big rock they call Barnacle Bill. It'll soon be off again to probe more rocks and the sandy surface of Mars. They had said it would all be over in a week. Now they're saying it may go on for a month. Our science correspondent James Wilkinson reports.
With more time to refine the pictures, scientists have now come up with a spectacular new panoramic view. The rover vehicle in the foreground at the foot of the ramp, in front of it a large rock they call Yogi. Beyond and into the distance, a fascinating array of rocks and pebbles. The experts were in raptures over their success.
The site is everything we hoped it could be. We're finding more and more surprises as we look in detail at the rocks through the terrain, and we're seeing some wonderful, wonderful surprises that we'll try to give you an idea of here today.
The pictures have begun to tell a story. This picture of a flat-topped rock shows it dusted with rust. Another shows tracks in the soil on the left. Another still shows tracks made as the rover swiveled round to visit the rock they call Barnacle Bill, about a foot away. For 10 hours, the rover held its sensor against the rock, finding out what it's made of. The scientists have been explaining what they want to do with the rover next.
The rover will now pull away from this rock and turn in this direction to do a rather extensive series of soil mechanics experiments in this sandy flat here, or the soil area. It will image them extensively from the rover as well as from the lander.
The geologists have discovered clues about the flood which occurred here billions of years ago. It left ridges and valleys. As the flood subsided, rocks piled up against each other when they could travel no further. And they found the crusts left behind as puddles evaporated. 2 days into the mission, and already the scientists are almost overwhelmed with results. James Wilkinson, BBC News.
The chairman of the BBC, Sir Christopher Bland, has defended big pay rises for some of the corporation's top managers. Broadcasting unions have criticised the increases, which range from 17% to 40%. But Sir Christopher said they'd been calculated sensibly. The BBC Director General, John Birt, had an 18% increase in salary and bonuses, taking his package to £354,000. More than 2 million members of the Woolwich have received free shares after the company's flotation on the stock exchange. Most are at least £1,500 better off. But as our economics correspondent Ed Crooks reports, there are concerns that all these free shares being given away will put more pressure on the Bank of England to raise interest rates.
Another building society flotation, another £5 billion worth of free shares for its customers. The new Woolwich shareholders have made an average gain of almost £2,200. And the Woolwich wasn't ashamed to admit that was high on its list of reasons for the float.
To be able to continue to grow in size, and that means we can have economies of scale, and to grow in the range of services that we can offer to customers, and therefore give much better value to customers. And also to realise value to customers. There are a lot of people from today onwards will have shares worth quite a lot of money, and I think that's a jolly good thing for them.
The Woolwich has had to handle the administration for 2.5 million new shareholders. More than 1 in 3 Britons have now benefited from the succession of huge flotations this year. The first, the Alliance and Leicester, was worth over £3 billion. The Halifax was worth a staggering £18 billion. The Norwich Union was almost £9 billion, and now the Woolwich is over £5 billion, contributing to a total of over £35 billion, falling into consumers' laps this year. Of those shares, perhaps £8 billion worth have been sold already. But people don't seem to be rushing out to spend all that money. The big holiday companies say they haven't seen the summer crowds swelled by newly affluent shareholders. Economists say that's exactly what you'd expect with windfalls.
I really don't think they affect the likelihood of someone spending, which is really dominated by the environment of prospects for the economy, prospects for income, and of course the uncertainties in the labour market.
When it meets later in the week, the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee is still expected to put up interest rates because it's worried that surging consumer spending will cause higher inflation. An unlikely alliance of City pundits and the Labour left is telling the Chancellor that's the price he'll pay for being too soft in his budget. But worries about windfalls don't seem like a terribly good reason for toughness. Ed Crooks, BBC News, the Treasury.
Sebastian Coe's 800 metres world record was equal this evening in Stockholm. It has stood for 16 years. Wilson Kipketer, who was born in Kenya but now runs for Denmark, was initially timed at 1 minute 41.74 seconds. And that's 1/100th of a second outside the record. But his official time exactly matched the mark set by Coe in Florence in 1981. Australia have done the expected and levelled the Ashes series 1-1 by beating England in the third test at Old Trafford. England needed to bat all day but were bowled out for 200 just before lunch. Our sports correspondent Neil Bennett reports.
The Australians had all day to administer the last rites but needed only an hour and a half. Shane Warne seemed to be the main threat to England's survival, but John Crawley began confidently against him and must have done enough to stay in the team for the next test. In fact, England's resistance was blown away by Glenn McGrath, with Mark Elam the first of his 4 victims of the morning. Robert Croft was next to go, finding no answer to McGrath's pace and bounce, and it was clear that England wouldn't be fending off defeat for very much longer. The Australians had the luck with them as well. John Crawley played McGrath easily into the covers, only to find he'd stepped back onto his stumps, 17 runs short of what would have been a consolation 100. Darren Gough was obviously not in the mood to get his head down and make Australia work for his wicket. England did at least raise the 200 before Caddick chipped a catch to Gillespie off Warne, and they'd subsided to a crushing defeat by a side at last living up to their billing.
We're starting to run into some form. Steve Waugh's batting back to his usual best. We're starting to get a few bowlers in form. McGrath, Gillespie and Shane Warne back in form, so we're starting to play some good cricket.
Steve Waugh was man of the match with 100 in each innings and showing the application England badly lacked.
I thought we came a bit stuck when we batted. We weren't quite positive enough. I thought we batted ourselves into a hole as well as Australia bowled. I felt we contributed to our own downfall a little bit.
Australia have squared the series with 3 tests to go, the next at Headingley. England need to summon up the spirit of Edgbaston if they're to have any hope of recapturing the Ashes. Neil Bennett, BBC News.
And the main news again tonight, there's been more trouble on the streets of Northern Ireland. The Sinn Féin leader, Martin McGuinness, says he was clubbed by the police during disturbances in the town of Balahi as loyalist bands prepared to start a parade. Our Ireland correspondent, Dennis Murray, is in Belfast. Dennis, we're getting reports of a man being killed. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it happened in a suburb of South Belfast, and the police have said that the death was not sectarian, which basically means that nobody else killed him. And there were reports of some kind of explosion at the time, but they haven't given us any more details than that so far.
And as for the rest of Northern Ireland tonight, we saw those few disturbances in Balahi. Didn't look terribly serious. Anywhere else, real problems?
No, nowhere else tonight. In fact, earlier on and during the afternoon, some buses were hijacked and burned. At one point, there were a number of vehicles burning in West Belfast. But really, it's been fairly quiet since then. At the same time, though, there's no doubting the anger that clearly is felt by Catholic communities right across Northern Ireland about the decision on the Drumcree March yesterday.
And there are more marches to come, many more marches to come.
Many more marches to come, not just in Balahi, but also in other towns, but particularly on the Lower Ormer Road in South Belfast, which is just not far from here, where there have been disturbances before. It's the second most controversial area after Drumcree, and the Orange Order have been saying they are determined to walk down the road on Saturday morning to the Saturday morning, the 12th of July parade, the big celebration. The local Catholic residents seem determined, absolutely determined, to oppose them after the Drumcree decision.
Can we pronounce the peace process dead tonight?
No, not yet, but I'm not even sure the last rites have been administered, but certainly it's got to be on the verge of collapse. Mo Mowlam has got an awful lot of work to do to revive it.
Dennis, thanks very much indeed. Newsnight is on BBC Two at 10:30, but from the 9 o'clock news for tonight, good night.
Good evening. Defence ministers were being lobbied tonight over plans to give the royal yacht Britannia a new home in the capital. Newsroom South East has learned the government is considering a £32 million scheme to give Britannia a permanent berth in the heart of London's Docklands.
When Britannia sailed out of Hong Kong harbour a week ago, it faced a future as uncertain as the colony it was leaving. One last valedictory tour around the United Kingdom, then the possibility of being broken up. A permanent berth in the heart of London's docks could provide a more dignified alternative to the scrap heap. The waterside building, which houses the Docklands Development Corporation, would be converted into a visitor centre. Businesses could entertain clients with banquets or receptions on board. With adult unemployment running at 18%, 160 permanent jobs would be welcome.
The centre of gravity of London is moving eastwards. With the Stratford International Exchange, the Jubilee Line extension, with the existing infrastructure that we have in transport, we're best placed to take the capital into the next millennium.
Everybody's paid for this vessel. I think they should get something in return for it.
It needs more attractions, yes. And it is a wonderful boat.
Keeping the yacht Britannia with a continued business role would spare the government the embarrassment the Conservatives faced when they proposed paying for a new one. Sean Lane, Newsroom South East.
A day-long armed siege at a house in Surrey is over. Police persuaded a man to come out of the house in Wallington this evening after 10 hours of negotiations. Armed officers went to the scene early this morning after the man barricaded himself inside the building. He later threw guns out of an upstairs window. A man has been arrested. And finally, an Oxfordshire grandfather who built a miniature railway through woods in his back garden has been told to tear up the tracks by local planners. Jeff Manning completed the giant train set last year, but now he's been told it's got to go.
After a long day at school and nursery, 5-year-old Adam and his little brother Toby can't wait to visit their granddad and have a go on his miniature railway.
I like it because it's red and nice and blue. And Toby likes it because it's got nice seats in it.
Their granddad bought a plot of land behind his house for £3,000 last year to extend his garden. Being a train enthusiast, Jeff then decided to put it to good use for his young grandsons.
The track was completed last August, much to the delight of Adam and Toby. But after just 2 circuits, a complaint was made. A councillor then came to visit and described this as more akin to Disneyland. Today they refused to make any comment to us except to say that the tracks have to be ripped up because they don't go with the environment.
It's clear Jeff Manning's determined to fight the plans to derail him in a bid to keep his 2 grandsons on track. Jackie Bartley, Newsroom South East, Sonning Common.
A shame. That's it. We're back in Business Breakfast tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Good evening. There's a spell of really warm and sunny weather coming up for just about all of us. Of course, it's not all good news because hay fever sufferers will be sniffling in the next few days. High pollen forecasts everywhere really, apart from the far north of Scotland and also around the coastal districts too. We've also got some poor air quality forecast for tomorrow for London and the rural parts of southeast England, and it's all because of this high pressure area staying close by, even those weakish weather fronts in the north moving away. So we'll see some brighter skies and more warmth coming in across the north of the country. Now, we've had one or two very isolated showers. Most of those are dying away now this evening. The main region of drizzle and rain will be moving away up across the northwest of Scotland, heading to the Northern Isles in time for the coming morning. Elsewhere, well, fairly clear skies. It may turn a little bit misty in one or two places, but looks like it's staying really quite muggy and warm overnight. Light breezes for the most part, just the beginnings of a freshening wind again in the northwest of Scotland. Now here, along with that breeze, there'll still be some low cloud and the odd patch of drizzle in the morning. That, for the most part, moving away, and over Northern Ireland and Scotland, we'll see brightening skies and sunny spells coming through. In fact, that goes for all parts of the country, really, by tomorrow afternoon. A few shreds of low cloud and mist maybe out around the Irish sea coast, but generally fine, hot and sunny. Maybe just the outside chance of one or two isolated showers in the latter part of the day, just inland from the east coast. The sun, the main thing, easy to burn in that in half an hour in the south, 40 minutes in the north, where we'll see temperatures up into the 20s during the afternoon. About the same with some sea breezes further south around the coast, but hotter still in inland areas, in fact a little hotter even than today. Looking ahead for Wednesday and Thursday, temperatures will rise, most places remaining hot and sunny, just one or two isolated showers and maybe some more showers and storms beginning to move in from the southwest by the end of Thursday into Friday.
Freedom of speech is a basic human right.
A head of state should be ultimately accountable to the electorate.
This is a programme that challenges our preconceptions.
I'm not the killer. When I see a target, I see a target. I do not see a human being.
Makes you think twice.
Parents have a responsibility to discipline their children.
Then you decide.
You Decide with John Humphreys, tomorrow at 11:05 on BBC One.
People have an opinion. This is one way of getting it aired.
A year after flight TWA 800 crashed, killing 230 people, Panorama asks whether a similar disaster could still happen. That's in half an hour, here on BBC One.
Join us this Wednesday for a rollover jackpot estimated at £14 million, making plans to spend Britain's biggest ever rollover jackpot.
There's a lake going over there.
Music from Dubstar and Scotland's 1000th Lottery Charity Award. Carol Smiley hosts the midweek draw, live Wednesday at 8, BBC One.